Welcome to Cake on Tuesday, where we spotlight the rule breakers, the underdogs who refuse to listen when everyone said it won't work. I'm Elizabeth Bieniek, and for the next 20 minutes, we're diving into another disruptive innovation story that proves sometimes the craziest ideas change everything. Today's guest is Jonah Lantto, a true crime writer, podcaster, and storyteller based in Minot, North Dakota. He is the co-host and producer of Midwest Murder, a globally trending true crime podcast that began in his basement and evolved into a Sunday night primetime television series. Jonah is also a live performer, booking out shows across the Midwest, co-founder of Midwest Memoirs, a professional interview project dedicated to preserving life stories, and the founder of the Good Talk Network, an audio-visual production company specializing in podcasting and live events. He specializes in telling stories that travel farther than the room they were told in. Jonah, welcome to the show. Please start off and tell us a little bit about what sets your soul on fire about what you do.
Thanks, Elizabeth, for having me. I'm not so sure if this is what sets my soul on fire about what I do, but can I just say what sets my soul on fire in general?
Go for it.
What sets my soul on fire really is inspiration, is being inspired. And I think that plays into everything that I do because I'm inspired by people's stories. I'm inspired by the small things, the makeup, what makes us who we are. All of these things are at the foundation of storytelling in whatever form it comes, whether I'm telling a true crime story and you're talking about somebody who evolved into a murderer somehow, and of course the victims and everything that is left over, the fallout from that, onto the memoirs where I'm helping, we help families preserve the legacy, the stories, how their families came here, what made them who they are. So I think all around, the cycle of inspiration is really what sets my soul on fire in life and in my work. And whether it's being inspired by somebody else or in the moments where I can be somebody else's source of inspiration, that really sets my soul on fire.
I love that. Okay, you have a lot of things that you're involved in, and we could dive into all of them. But let's start with the podcast, that Midwest Murder, that and how it started out in your basement and went huge. I love this. Cake on Tuesday is all about disruptive innovation and doing something different and wild and crazy to shake up the world and industry that you're in. Talk to us a little bit about that story. How did it start getting wildly popular?
It all started in my basement, as you said, but not with Midwest Murder. I began podcasting simply because I wanted to share ideas. I wanted to talk to people about their ideas. I wanted to have contextualized conversations about big topics that you can't dive into during a soundbite. So back in 2016, when I initially started podcasting, I was kind of just frustrated with what I viewed as a lot of flashpoint moments on huge topics that really just deserved deeper discussion. And that's what pushed me into podcasting, having conversations, going interviews. But the thing that I did that was entirely different than at the time, I was just a guy in my neighborhood. Maybe I could say I have some local popularity. I have a lot of friends, right? I had in the early 2010s, I had ran a few events. I had put on some concerts and some shows and some gaming tournaments and things like that. So I had like this pre-existing, maybe small personality, but I wasn't a big person, no celebrity by any means. I just wanted to get on the microphone and talk to people. That evolved into a locally emphasized podcast. So where so many podcasts are struggling for this national audience, I dug into my local audience, into my local community figures, and I became visible in my community in a way that I never had been before. I partnered with a local writer, journalist, and a man who would eventually become a city councilman. His name is Josh Walsky. Him and I started a podcast called Good Talk Minot. And it was a weekly show where we would talk about the things that were happening in our community, not just events, but things that were changing our community, the laws, the nonprofits that are making a difference. And that grew over the course of several years to the point where Josh and I were doing 2 shows weekly with guests. These people are coming into my house, downstairs into my basement studio, past my laundry room and everything. And it was all set up really, really nice. But we grew to the point where we had our mayoral candidate announced his candidacy on our show down in my basement. And that just grew my network in so many different ways. And we became really a voice for entrepreneurs, a voice for nonprofit leaders, for civic leaders. I interviewed a gold medal hockey player. I mean, so many cool things happened from that. And that's also where I met my co-host of Midwest Murder, Don Palumbo. So when the podcast in the basement began, eventually I started producing podcasts for other people. So other people in the community that wanted to have their own podcast and didn't have the knowledge, the equipment, anything, they came to me and I started producing for other people. Mind you, I didn't go to school for any of this. When I began podcasting, I just threw $1,500 into gear, started watching videos and learning how to go.
I love that. That's the best way to start, though. Action trumps everything. Just do it.
Eventually, Don Palumbo, my partner, pitches me on the idea for Midwest Murder. This would have been in about 2019. I had grown my podcast presence in the community to a point where I moved out of the basement into a full-time studio space here in Minot. And this is actually my second studio. We moved from that and expanded to the space that I'm in now. But at that point, I was still looking for as many ideas as I could to use the skills that I had developed, as well as the equipment that I had, my studio space, all of it. Don said, "Hey, do you ever think about doing a true crime podcast?" And I was like, no, hell no, not at all. And this was because I was just naive to what true crime podcasts were. I had never listened to one. And here I am, this podcaster who has made his name and my understanding in that world as podcasts are conversations, they're interviews, they're people BSing about these big things. And I'm feeling like, I don't want to do that about murder. I don't want to talk about, that sounds hideous. But a year or so later, I have an author, a true crime author, on my Good Talk Minot show. Her name is CJ Wynn. She wrote a book about a murder that happened here in Minot, and it's called Wilder Intentions. Fantastic book, great person, great book. And I read her book, and I had her on my show. And I like to say that if Dawn planted the seed of a true crime podcast, then CJ was the water that allowed that plant to grow, because it opened my eyes up to what a true crime podcast actually was, could be, and is. And I was able to see my place as a storyteller, as a researcher, and as a writer in that true crime field. So Dawn and we end up releasing the first episode of Midwest Murder in October of 2020. We do our first live recorded show in January of 2021, and that was for about 48 people here in our hometown. We did it again in our hometown, and both these little shows sold out. And then we said, well, let's push our network in the state. Who else would want to host us for a live ticketed true crime podcast recording? And then we went on our first little tour in North Dakota. It was a 5-6 city tour. We hit Minot, Williston, Bismarck, Fargo, I can't remember, a small town in Minnesota, and then Grand Forks, and then came back, and then we were home. And Midwest Murder has just grown from there. 3 years later, we signed the TV deal with Beck TV, became a Sunday night primetime mainstay here in this region. And you can also watch it on the Beck TV app for free anywhere. And we've brought our live Midwest Murder show to audiences across the Midwest, as far as Omaha and all the way down into Iowa. And we just got our first booking in Nashville in June. So we're super excited about that. And that's a lot.
That's so exciting.
In a compressed little timeline there, Elizabeth.
So many things I want to dive into now, Jonah. But can we take a step back and first go to your mindset when we were first asked, hey, do you want to do a true crime podcast? And can you clarify for our audience and for myself, because I am not wildly well known in this space, what is a true crime podcast? What differentiates it from other podcasts?
Certainly. Of course, some podcasts, they're sports. They're very topical. In my mind, they're very conversational. A podcast is exactly what we are doing right now, right? And you might focus on a Star Wars, you might focus on professional wrestling, you might focus on business, entrepreneurship, health, all of these things. But it's always, generally speaking, in my mind at that point, it was always interview based. And I didn't see the storytelling aspect that was possible in a true crime narrative, where in every episode of Midwest Murder, myself or my co-host has done all of the research. So this is a real crime, of course, somebody who has died here in the Midwest. And one of us has done all of the research of the story, and we've written the story, and the other person has no idea what the story will be about. So in our show, one of us is the storyteller, the other person is reacting. And of course, no two stories are the same, because Everything is so different, from the location to the motives, or sometimes maybe even the lack thereof, the reactions of the community, the victims. And I again understood podcasts to be more or less two people having a conversation, and this is a story, this is a narrative, and there are so many layers to storytelling and making an audience feel and smell the things that are happening in the story that you're telling. And Dawn and I have built such a chemistry between one another, and I always felt like that in this, the fact that the other person doesn't know what the story is going to be, you get organic and natural reactions. They are the audience member at that point, and it really makes a big difference, I think, in our delivery. And then you're also getting two different storytelling styles, because Dawn and I don't tell stories the same. We don't react the same. And again, you pair that with the fact that no true crime stories are the same. And as we've shown time and again, truth is stranger than fiction, and especially in the true crime world.
Very much so. So I want to talk too about this hyper localization that you did. Was this, you've been very, very public about your town, about moving forward the issues in Minot and making sure that you're very involved in the community. Was this a strategy, or was it just a matter of, I'm kind of curious, were you trying to differentiate yourself from other podcasts at the time, or was it really just love for your town and community that then evolved into a strategy?
It was, I think, a little bit of both. At the forefront of it was collaborative opportunity. So I had already started the Good Talk as it was, and I'm sitting in a local coffee shop with my co-host and partner. We're talking about, what are we going to talk? We're just talking about future episodes. The guy that I started this with, a gentleman by the name of Chris Robb, him and I just started the Good Talk, and it was that conversation piece. We're in a local coffee shop. Well, Josh Walsky, who I started Good Talk Minot with, overheard us talking about the podcast. He went and listened to my podcast, and uh, in the beginning, I didn't even have an intro. So essentially, every episode we did opened with a Big Lebowski quote and some like little song. It was just hilarious, right? That's how little I knew. I didn't even have an intro to my podcast in 2016 when I started podcasting. So it says how far I've come. But Walsky heard us talking in a coffee shop, sought me out, found me, and said, "Hey, this is awesome what you're doing. Have you ever considered, or would you consider doing a local version of this podcast that you're doing?" And I was, "Yeah, man, let's have a chat." And he dropped a Lebowski quote and told me how he was also a huge fan of the Big Lebowski. So that allowed us some great connective tissue. But a
Cinch
lot
the
of the
deal right
things that
there.
I've been able to achieve, Elizabeth, frankly, are from collaboration. They're from opportunity and not letting it go to waste, and from becoming really somebody who, ideas, everybody has an idea. There's a bunch of, I can walk outside and run into 5 people with a good idea. How many of them have ever acted on any level toward making that idea a reality? And that's simply something that I've wanted to do and have done. Josh Walsky came to me with the idea for Good Talk Minot. I was already doing the Good Talk. I already had the equipment. I already had the time, and I knew I was at a transitionary period there between careers where I was not happy with where I was. I felt like I was in a plateau. I felt like there was more I could do, more I could achieve, more I had to offer. And that's pushes me into the Good Talk, where in the beginning, I launched this. I didn't know if it was going to work. I didn't know if it was going to make money. I was telling myself, well, hey, if it doesn't work, I can go sell cars and do whatever it takes until I find my path. And this became it. So a lot of this is all, but not all of it was my idea, but it was somebody's idea that I helped expand or helped execute. And yeah, Josh and I did Good Talk Minot, and that hyper localization. I think there was a reality that, how does my name have relevance in the national podcast space when every comedian with a Netflix special is out there, when every actor has a podcast about the sitcom they were on, right? And so I was like, well, people know me around here, and people care about our community, and I care about the community. And now we can talk about we can talk with the people who are making a difference in the community.
Hmm. You pointed out the idea of collaboration, local collaboration. And I think that's really important. I think that's something, I have not been in the podcasting world for nearly as long as you, but something I've discovered is it's such a great network. And I had a former coach that used to say, approach every conversation as if you don't know the outcome, because you don't, but go into everything saying, I have nothing to gain, nothing to lose, and nothing to prove. And I always thought that was a really interesting philosophy to approach a conversation. And I find having these conversations every week with people, it's fascinating. And there's so many times you end up feeding off the energy of the other person and looking at like, oh, we should do something else together. We should do this together. What if we built this? Do you find that is constantly growing and you're now flooded with opportunities?
It has over time. Those opportunities have, my focus has narrowed on where my skill set applies best. There was a moment, it's funny that you would ask me that. If you have you heard of 1 million cups, a national thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I got to be a speaker on 1 million cups quite a few years ago, and it was kind of at the onset of Midwest Murder, where we had just gone on our first tour, and it was really cool. And the gentleman, Tyler, who runs our 1MC chapter in Bismarck, the state capital, he asked me, "You say yes to everything?" That's it. I do. I say yes to so many things. And he said, "When do you hit your burnout rate? When do you know you've reached that point where you've said yes to too many things, or you've split your focus across too many pages where your work in other areas will start to slide?" And at that point, I hadn't hit it. So that's why that was 4 years ago now. And at that point, when Midwest Murder started, we were doing a late night comedy talk show here, and we were doing about one show per quarter. Again, a live ticketed event. Essentially, I had a team that we were writing. It was like a Jimmy Kimmel combined with a Saturday Night Live. And we would do live skits, and we filmed it. It was before a live audience here. I mean, it culminated in a musical. We roasted our mayor. I mean, we did so many fantastically awesome things with that. But I was kind of hitting a burnout rate with that. And that had to go on hiatus because Midwest Murder was taking off. And it's like a lot of these ideas that happen were not intended to be businesses. Midwest Memoirs, I started that because I love my grandma, and I realized I have recording equipment, and I wanted to get her stories. And I capture her stories. And like a year and a half, 2 years later, when Dawn and I started Midwest Murder, she still had a full-time job. And being an entrepreneur, being full-time into this, we weren't there yet for her. And she really wanted to move into that. And I said, well, I did this thing with my grandma. Maybe other people would want this. Maybe this is something that we can do for other people. And I told her what I had done, and Midwest Memoirs was created from that. And so many of these things that I think happen organically when you find where you belong, when you find what your skill set is and you develop it and you invest in that, then you learn the ways, or you look for the ways, or you create the ways where you can direct your skills toward that financial comeuppance that we all ultimately need to pay the bills.
Hmm. What has surprised you most about this journey? Or maybe if we flip that around and look forward, what are you most excited about doing next?
Really, I'm always excited next for the next Midwest Murder live show. I can't, just being able to seeing the transformation of people's energy, feel of their emotions, of their reactions. And this is something that I've written. And Midwest Murder's funny. And we're not comedians, but criminals do really awfully stupid stuff. And sometimes so do the people who investigate them. And so there's just there's a lot of things that happen around it. And I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, Midwest Murder is a comedy show. It's not, but we have a dark sense of humor. We never, of course, have any jokes at the expense of victims. This is very serious content matter, and we take it very seriously. And you can see that. And you go through our reviews, and people say all the time, they're so respectful of the victims. It's very victim forward and victim conscious. But when you're dealing with such heavy, heavy matter, funny things happen, funny things get said, and we do like to kind of cut the room. So I'm always looking forward to that next show, to meeting the people in the audience, and then just getting that. There's just something so powerful. I imagine it's got to be something similar to what musicians feel when they're on stage, but there's something so powerful about watching a joke you created land, or a story that you've written. And in my mind, I'm typing this out, and I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to see people crawling in their seats when they hear this, because it's just, if you can create in that room the smell of something that happened in a story and people are cringing about it, you mean you've done something pretty powerful there. So I do always look forward to that, when I right down to it, that next live show.
I want to ask about listener feedback because you have a chance of being so focused locally that you can run into people who are huge fans of your show. What is maybe one of the craziest or funniest live feedbacks you've gotten from your show?
We have had people who investigated the murders at our shows. And so I don't know if this isn't necessarily crazy, but for me, it honored us because we have had at our live shows the director of the North Dakota BCI. That's the head investigative state agency. For those unfamiliar, every state has one, right? And ours, it's the BCI, the Bureau of Criminal Investigation of North Dakota. So the gentleman who's been the director there for almost 20 years has been to our live shows and has told us what a damn fine job that we do and how well that we represent both sides of these stories. So that for me, just knowing, I mean, I know there was another episode we had nearly the whole state crime lab at a show. And so just knowing that the people involved with these stories listen and have respect for what we do and pay attention to that I think is just a really big deal for us. And then we've also had stories where we've had families want us to tell their story. And that's a pretty deep ask when somebody has lost a loved one and they ask you, will you tell this story? And that's a huge responsibility. That's, I think, another one where it's just really surprising to get that from people and just to know that you can do that story justice. And in this case in particular, the resolution and wasn't fully satisfactory. One person was convicted of this murder. It was undoubtedly several more involved, and we had hoped to maybe jar loose some more stories and maybe more witnesses to this event by running our podcast for that family. Unfortunately, it hasn't resulted in that, but you never know.
Yeah, that's wild. Looking back at your story and your journey, is there anything that you would have done differently, have told your younger self, or just an insight that you got in hindsight looking back and say, oh, I get this. This connection makes sense now?
It's difficult to say that I would do anything differently because if I had, would I even be here? And so I will say every podcast I ever started, I wanted it to hit the stratosphere that Midwest Murder hit. Every single one.
Yeah.
And I put my heart and my effort into all of them. I mean, we ran a Game of Thrones podcast that hit top 10 listen to Game of Thrones podcasts during its peak. So I think that I've always wanted everything to be at that level, but the reality is not everything could get there. If I had started Midwest Murder as my second or third podcast, would it have taken off? Probably. It would have been impossible because I wouldn't have known Dawn Palumbo. Midwest Murder is not what it is without her. The way that her and our chemistry together is what makes the show. I certainly very capable in my abilities as a storyteller and as a podcast host, but I think you really, everything comes along at the point at which it needs to. And you arrive where you're meant to when you're paying attention to those signs and you're investing in yourself when you see those signs. And I think it's very important. So I don't know that I can look back and say if I did this differently here or there. I think this is the path I wanted to be on since I graduated high school. It just took me until I was 36 to start the business, right?
Jonah, if people want to learn more about you, your journey, your show, the businesses you're involved in, where can they find more?
The easiest place, my website, jonahlantto.com. From there, anything else I'm involved in. If you are interested in a memoir for your family or you want to find a Midwest Murder live show, if you're a listener in the Midwest, we are very active in our touring of the Midwest. And if you're somebody in Nashville, come check out Midwest Murder Live at the City Winery in Nashville. It's such a huge, huge deal. Like, even to say that I've been booked in Nashville still gives me goosebumps when I say it, Elizabeth. It's just so wild that this little podcast that started in my basement, recorded once for 50 people, and now somebody wants us in Nashville.
Thanks for joining another Cake on Tuesday celebration of beautiful disruption. Please share it, review it, and find more innovative stories at podcast.cakeontuesday.com. I'm Elizabeth Bieniek. Be bold, stay curious. Now go have some cake.